And with less than 2 days before a potential government shutdown, President Trump today speaking about the Republican-backed resolution that'll keep the government funded.
If there's a shutdown, even the Democrats admit it'll be their fault. And I'm hearing a lot of Democrats are going to vote for it, and I hope they do. This is an extension. But ultimately, we want to vote for one big, beautiful bill.
House Republicans this week narrowly passing a bill that would keep the government funded until the end of September. The initiative keeps the current spending level static, but reallocates much of the money to President Trump's priorities. Now the ball is in the Senate. Republicans currently holding majority seats in the lower chamber, but the party will need several votes from the Democrats to pass the funding. And meanwhile, top Senate Democrat Chuck Schumer is now signaling support for the funding plan. This reversal comes a day after Minority Leader Jeffries said that he would not be supporting the continuing resolution. He explained his new decision on the Senate floor.
No one on my side of the aisle wants a government shutdown. Members who support this CR do not want a government shutdown. Members who oppose this CR do not want a government shutdown. As bad as passing the CR is, as I said, allowing Donald Trump to take even much more power via a government shutdown is a far worse option.
The reversal signals that enough Democrats could join Senate Republicans to pass the CR and avert a government shutdown. The federal workforce changes enacted by President Trump and his administration have been a key topic of discussion at the House Democrats' annual policy retreat. Our Washington correspondent Luis Martinez brings us more.
Just look at the split screen. People can't afford their rent. They can't afford eggs. And what is Trump doing? He is slashing the Department of Education in half, going after 180,000 teachers whose jobs depend on federal funding.
House Democrats are gathered here in Leesburg, Virginia for the second day of their annual policy retreat. And the government cuts at the Department of Education is one of the main topics of conversations. Democrats do not oppose government reform, but disagree with how President Trump is enacting change.
Well, I believe in government reform, and I believe there are a lot of places where we can find inefficiency and we can make government work better for people, and I've pushed for years on that front. But to take a sledgehammer is going to do damage that can't be repaired.
For Democratic Senator Amy Klobuchar, whose mom was a teacher, the Education Department is a personal issue.
First of all, it is especially helpful when it comes to student loans. And number two, people in rural areas really depend on the Department of Education for help. And then number three, kids with disabilities. Wait till those parents and those families find out about these cuts.
House Democrats are urging Senate Democrats to reject the House Republican stopgap bill to fund government. If Senate Democrats reject the bill, the government will shut down Friday at midnight.
What we do have is the power to stop a bad bill that will strip programs away from Americans.
During the policy retreat, House Democrats have promised to stand by federal workers who have lost their jobs.
Amid this chaos, Democrats have a clear message. We're fighting for and with working people.
You're going to see that unity in the weeks and the months ahead as we expose and talk about what the House Republican budget does. Our job over the next 21 months is to make sure that voters are hearing this message loud and clear, and we're going to keep repeating it over and over.
It remains to be seen what other actions House Democrats take as they oppose the Trump administration's changes to the federal workforce. Reporting from Leesburg, Virginia, Luis Eduardo Martinez, NTD News.
A federal judge has ordered 6 government agencies to reinstate thousands of recently hired employees who were dismissed. The ruling comes amid President Trump's effort to rein in the federal workforce. A ruling by District Judge William Aslap in San Francisco blocking federal agencies from moving forward with the workforce cuts. Aslap had already temporarily halted the Office of Personnel and Management from ordering agencies to fire probationary employees last month, but Trump's push to shrink the federal government could soon escalate. Today marks the deadline for agencies to submit plans for a second wave of mass layoffs and budget cuts. The Trump administration is asking the Supreme Court to allow birthright citizenship restrictions to take effect partially while legal challenges proceed. The The president's order would deny citizenship to those born after February 19th, 2025, if their parents are in the country illegally. The executive action also prohibits government agencies from issuing or accepting any state document recognizing such citizenship for children. 3 federal appeals courts have blocked the order nationwide. Roughly 24 states have sued the Trump administration over this executive order. Plaintiffs claim the action violates the 14th Amendment's guarantee of citizenship to anyone born in the United States. The Justice Department contends that individual judges lack the authority to issue nationwide injunctions. And President Trump says his team has broken the deadlock in securing a ceasefire deal between Ukraine and Russia. This comes as he's meeting the chief of NATO at the White House as negotiations continue. NTD's White House correspondent Iris Tao has more.
This thing would have gone on for a long time.
Breaking a deadlock. It was crucial.
Yeah, we broke a deadlock.
And President Trump expresses optimism about a ceasefire as he again calls on Russia to accept a deal that Ukraine has said yes to.
Now we're going to see whether or not Russia's there, and if they're not, it'll be a very disappointing moment for the world.
Thursday's meeting with the NATO chief comes as Trump's special envoy is in Moscow for talks. Russian President Putin now says he supports a ceasefire in principle, but might need to call Trump as he still holds reservations. And Trump says yes.
I'd love to meet with him or talk to him.
On the Ukraine side, Trump says his team has already gone over details with them, like what land Ukraine will and will not be able to keep, and the reality that is not joining NATO.
They've known that answer for 40 years, in all fairness.
Meanwhile, with NATO chief Mark Rutte sitting right next to him, Trump doubles down on acquiring Greenland, which is part of Denmark, a NATO member.
And we have to do it. We really need it for national security.
Secretary General Rutte, while declining to weigh in directly, supports Trump's reasoning.
When it comes to the high north and the Arctic, you are totally right. The Chinese are now using these routes. We know that the Russians are rearming.
And Greenland just elected a new government led by a pro-independence party. While Trump says that's good for the U.S., the likely new leader insists that Greenlanders must decide their own future. Reporting from the White House, Iris Tao, NTD News.
And for more on ceasefire talks between Ukraine and Russia, we're joined by Dan Rice, president of American University Kyiv and former special advisor to the commander of the Ukraine Armed Forces. Great to have you with us, Dan.
Thank you. Nice to be here, Steve.
So Russia's President Putin expressing what it seems to be reservations about the proposed 30-day ceasefire, citing uncertainties about developments in Kursk, among some other regions. What are you seeing here? What is Putin ultimately aiming for with this agreement? And will we see a deal anytime soon?
Well, what I think we've seen over the last 2 weeks is a monumental change on the Western side of the equation. And so 2 weeks ago, we saw that disaster in the White House with President Zelensky and President Trump that, was unfortunate, and it kind of shocked the world. And immediately, President Zelensky flew to London to meet with the European leaders who hailed him as a hero. And then they promised about $800 billion in aid, more aid than they'd promised the entire time. So you see Mark Rutte coming into the office now. We have an agreement now within Zelensky and President Trump agreeing to the ceasefire terms, putting the ball in the court of Putin. Now you have a unified NATO. You had the NATO leader, Secretary General Rutte, meet today with the White House, and you have a unified NATO. This is the worst nightmare for Putin, and so he now has to make some very difficult decisions and come to the table. The reports were across the board today. Some of his envoys said absolutely not. Some of them said we need our terms. They're going to basically, most likely decline it, but they'll negotiate. At least the tables are being discussed now.
And to that meeting the other day with Zelensky in the Oval Office, the President of the United States often takes incoming from the press here in the U.S. About, maybe his flowery language toward Putin, but we're seeing him starting to talk tough right now, threatening sanctions, potentially tariffs. What do you make of this change in tone?
I would focus on the actions, not the process. President Trump has a unique process, to say the least, but I would focus on the outcomes. And what we're seeing is he's aligning the West against Putin and in favor of Ukraine, and that's what I'm interpreting this as. You've seen a sea change in Europe. They had 3 years to do this, but they finally came together once Trump got involved. And so I think he is putting them to the test, the European leaders. And we're seeing some great leaders step up in the UK and Germany. New Secretary General Mark Rutte, Kaja Kallas from the EU. We're seeing the Germans step up. All of a sudden, we have really great leadership coming out of Europe that recognizes the threat of Russia that they didn't recognize for a long time. And now they're also recognizing that President Trump isn't going to pay the whole bill. And so you have a bunch of people that have been going to dinner for 30 years with one paying the majority of the bill. And now he's forcing this down and they're stepping up. And I think it's great. Secretary Rutte admitted that President Trump was right in the first term, saying that they weren't spending enough. Only 6 out of 30 were spending 2% of their GDP. Secretary Rutte now wants 5% of GDP. So they're aligned together. I think Rutte and Trump are aligned. And Rutte has no legitimate power over these 32 countries. He has to lead by influence, and he is doing that. And I think that's great.
Some folks have said that Russia has appeared more resilient than many people may have thought in terms of all of the pressure that has already been put on them with sanctions throughout this, three-year war, or however long it's been. President Trump has threatened to impose financial pressure on Russia if no ceasefire is reached. Could this economic pressure be enough to impact Putin's decision?
I think you need all levers of power, political, military, economic. You've seen Russia lose 850,000 casualties over the last 3 years. You've seen them lose 24,000 artillery pieces, 20,000 armored personnel carriers, 10,000 tanks. They're losing all of their best equipment, all of their best officer corps. They're really getting destroyed. Their army is getting destroyed within Ukraine. Their interest rates are 21%. Their inflation rate is 10%. Their reserves are down to nearly zero. They have no money to fund this war. They have no ability to go to the West to get debt to fund the war. By summer, they are likely to run out of money. And so what we have is a meeting in The Hague, where Secretary Rutte is from. That's also the criminal court, the International Criminal Court that convicted Putin of war crimes. And you have NATO meeting there in June. This is going to be a colossal meeting. This is going to be an amazing meeting in The Hague for NATO. We'll be negotiating likely between now and then. I doubt it will come to some resolution between now and then, but President Trump was invited today by Secretary Rutte to go to The Hague in June to attend this meeting, and we're going to have a united NATO against Russia, and you're going to have Russia running out of money, and all of these sanctions are hitting. They are hurting the Russian economy significantly. You're going to have most of the airlines run bankrupt in this year. They can't borrow any money in Russia. So 30 airlines are believed to go bankrupt. You're starting to see the cracks within the fissures. They've been very risk tolerant, and they've been able to take a lot of casualties, more so than most people thought. But a lot of those were just criminals. They euthanized their prison population. They euthanized a whole bunch of mercenaries from the Wagner Group from Africa. So those didn't hurt the people of Russia. Now you're starting to see kids from Stalingrad, from St. Petersburg, and from Moscow start to be killed in Kursk, because they went to Kursk where they didn't think they were going to be fighting. So now Russia is responding within Kursk. I see that Ukraine will continue to fight along the front lines, and they'll be in a very good position to go to negotiations.
Dan Rice, really appreciate you joining us. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve. Nice to meet you.
Foreign ministers of the G7 meeting in Canada during rising tensions over tariffs. Canada and European governments are imposing retaliatory tariffs on the United States. President Trump threatening to further increase tariffs in reciprocation. NTD's Washington correspondent Jack Bradley has the detail.
Tariffs, a contentious topic between the U.S. and allied nations, looms over meetings with leaders of the Group of Seven, or G7, in Canada. The foreign ministers from the U.S., Canada, UK, France, Germany, Italy, and Japan kicked off their first of 2 days meetings on Thursday. Mainly, the leaders are in discussions over a potential ceasefire deal in the Russia-Ukraine war and retaliatory tariffs.
In every single meeting, I will raise the issue of tariffs to coordinate our response with the Europeans and to put pressure on the Americans.
Canada is imposing retaliatory tariffs on U.S. goods worth $20 billion starting Thursday. The European Union, which some G7 members are on, said it will take similar actions beginning April. It was in response to President Trump imposing 25% tariffs on all steel and aluminum imports. Trump has threatened to impose 200% tariffs on European wine and alcohol if the EU enacts its retaliatory tariffs.
Look, we've been ripped off for years, and we're not going to be ripped off anymore. No, I'm not going to bend at all. Aluminum or steel or cars. We're not going to bend.
A day before going into the G7 meetings, Rubio defended the tariffs as a national security measure.
It's not just against Canada, it's not just against Mexico, it's not just against G7 countries. He's imposed steel and aluminum tariffs now on virtually the entire world. And the reason why is not to punish those countries. It's because he has outlined the need to develop a domestic capability. If you don't have steel and aluminum, you can't build warships. You can't build airplanes. You're not an industrial economy. There are things we have to be able to protect, and there's a lot of unfair trade practices.
Canada is the biggest foreign supplier of steel and aluminum to the U.S. Meanwhile, President Trump has repeatedly called for Canada to become the 51st state.
To be honest with you, Canada only works as a state. It doesn't. We don't need anything they have.
The G7 meeting will conclude on Friday, where leaders will hope to make progress on ending the Russia-Ukraine war and some stability over tariffs. Jack Bradley, NTD News.
Thank you for watching the Capitol Report. If you want to see our full broadcast, check us out at epochtv.com.